While so much of the media world is distracted by Robert Mueller's circus and criminal prosecution of Roger Stone, there is an even greater persecution of a journalist that's been going on for years now. I'm really pleased to welcome back to the program Sharyl Attkisson. Sharyl, how are you?
I'm great. Thank you for having me.
I'm glad to hear that you're great. I've been eagerly anticipating the results of the oral arguments this morning from your case, which began years ago, didn't it?
I think we filed for permission to sue in 2014 or 2015, had to overcome hurdles when you're suing the government, got permission, and now, so it's been several years. We're still moving through court.
And for people who maybe aren't familiar with you, Sharyl, and your book, The Smear, you began reporting on Fast and Furious before anybody really knew about it, and this really brought an onslaught of government intrusion into your digital devices, illegal surveillance. Can you give us just a little bit of background maybe for people who aren't familiar with the story?
Well, only in retrospect did I know that the interference and problems my family was having with pretty much every electric device in our house, electronic device, through the Verizon Fios line, even our landlines and cell phones, which became unusable, and Verizon couldn't fix it, and the TVs, and you name it. At the time, we just thought these are weird technical things going on, but only in retrospect, with the help of sources in the intel community first, that alerted me I was likely being monitored because of the reporting I was doing at CBS News, monitored by the government. And then through forensics exams, we've had probably 6 different teams that have looked at various aspects. We know forensically that this was government in nature because of the tools used and the methods and so on. So I've been suing to try to get justice simply because the Department of Justice will not prosecute or investigate itself on this matter. So the only recourse we have is a civil suit.
Wow. And so today you heard oral arguments. How did that go? What was the result of today's hearing?
We, I guess we'll know the results whenever the court feels like it. Maybe 2 months, maybe 6 months. It was a 3-panel appellate court because our case was abruptly dismissed after all of this time last year, maybe about a year ago, on various grounds such as government officials have immunity from certain lawsuits, and they do. They enjoy broad immunity, but we're arguing they're to that. And under some discovery problems, the lower court thought a 16-day period where we didn't move forward as fast as they liked. I mean, we've been trying for 4 years to move forward, and then there was a short period where the court decided we didn't take enough action. And we argued, well, we issued a ton of subpoenas and tried to get depositions, but the government, every time we made a move to do this, made it clear they were going to litigate every subpoena and every attempt for meaningful discovery. So we didn't get anywhere. But nonetheless, the lower court said we had our chance to identify the John Does and the government that we're suing. So some of the questions today at oral arguments before a 3-panel appellate court centered on some of these things. And you never know how it's going to go. I think they asked good questions. I think they paid attention. All the judges, 3 judges were engaged, seemed to be good, fair judges. But I have no idea when it comes time to write the opinion, what they're really going to do.
Wow. So it's very frustrating. Now, Sharyl, we've had a lot of people who have come into the news since you and I last spoke who are basically centrally involved in the creation of some of the laws that allow the government to do what they've done to you and what they've been doing to so many other people like Dr. Jerome Corsi and Roger Stone and Donald Trump, everybody. I'm talking specifically, of course, about Brett Kavanaugh and William Barr, 2 guys that played a role in the creation of the Patriot Act and some of these laws that allow the NSA and other government agencies to just spy on every one of us.
Yeah, it's a problem as we've learned more. My case I've maintained, of course, it's important to me, but I think it's important in a larger sense because we know how many people they were doing this to and how many more they must have been doing this to that we don't know about, because they meaning the government intel agencies and insiders, had in recent years granted themselves broad discretion to legally, I think, get around the protections and rules that were supposed to govern them so that our rights aren't abused, so that U.S. citizens are not surveilled by the government. This is something that's offensive to the Constitution.
Yeah.
And yet, behind the scenes, we now know they had changed policies to such a degree they could wiretap a foreign target and then at one point listen to everybody at least 3 hops away, meaning whoever talked to them, whoever talked to the people who talked to them, and whoever talked to the people who talked to the people who talked to them, which
Right.
is pretty much the whole country. And once you start saying you have this broad latitude to wiretap everybody in the U.S., and then you promise to store it in a secure database where all these won't be named and nobody can really search through it for political purposes, come to find out they are storing it, and the names are being unmasked or told inside the government. So what was happening, I think, is a huge storyline missing. It's probably...
I'm losing you a little bit there, Sharyl. Can you still hear me?
Me? Sorry.
We've got you back now. Sorry, you were talking about how they're not supposed to store the information, they say. I think what you're talking about is the system that Bill Binney has told us about in the past. Him and his group had created some technology called Thin Thread that was supposed to monitor all electronic communications throughout the world, but to keep the identities of those communicating secret unless there was a good reason to be investigating further. And of course, what you've described sounds like a shampoo commercial from the 1970s, where if you've spoken to someone and eventually they can just spy on everybody.
Right. And I'm talking about, I don't know technically how many databases they have and store, but there are NSA databases, including one that was searched through in 2016, the election year, statistically, what looks like an inordinate...
Sharyl? Well, Cheryl's driving in her car right now, so there might be a little bit of in and out with the cell phone reception. I'm going to just keep talking, so if Sharyl hears me, she can come back, and if we lose her, we'll call her back. Sharyl, can you hear me? Oh, we've lost her. All right, we'll try her back here. Just a moment. Let me see if I can get her back on the phone. This is really one of the most important cases going on right now. And, you know, Sharyl was a bit of a pioneer in terms of being spied on by the government. Let's see if we can reach her. It says it's ringing.
Hi, sorry.
No problem. We lost you there for a second. So you were talking about the facility in Bluffdale, Utah, I guess, where they're storing all this information.
Well, I think we're talking about a lot of separate databases. I don't know that that's in Utah. I don't know where the NSA database that I'm referring to is located. I only know that statistically, there's some stats that are released. There was an incredibly suspicious uptick times this database was searched for Americans' names, innocent Americans' names that originally weren't even going to be stored, but at one point the intel community said behind the scenes, well, we'll store them a little while. Well, now they're stored in this database that was searched in the election year way more than it had been searched before by people working inside the government, including, I'm told, the names of journalists and other people. What are they looking for? Well, one can theorize they're looking for dirt or connections or information about all kinds of things that could be perhaps used to the advantage of those doing the searches.
Now, Sharyl, to what extent have you observed when someone's digging up dirt on Donald Trump or digging up dirt on Sharyl Attkisson, it's suggestive that there's something hidden that they're finding. But what I find, because there's been a lot of people who are using similar tactics against me, is that when they don't find any wrongdoing, they just make something up.
Well, this is the fear. Like, I've heard a lot of people say, well, the government spies on us, so what? I don't do anything wrong. I mean, young people today have gotten numb to the notion that this is so antithetical to our privacy rights and to the Constitution, and they kind of say, well, this is, what they do. And I think what they don't realize is, I mean, there were classified documents that have been planted in my computer. Who knows why? But there are very dangerous things the government can do, even if you have no evidence of a crime inside your computer. Suppose you have embarrassing information about a relative that doesn't impact you directly, but you wouldn't want it revealed, and someone can hold something over your head on that score. There's all kinds of reasons we don't want people, and our government especially, unlawfully spying on us and finding out our most, private details of our lives. These are protected matters.
Did you hear John Brennan's comments just the other day where I think he was on CNN and he said something to the effect of everyone is presumed innocent until accused of a crime?
He has said some of things that seem so outrageous, especially when you consider just a short time ago, some of these government officials that are saying these sorts of things were actually in charge of our, or at least had influence over our private information, and were actually in charge of investigations. When you see how much they say they hate or dislike or think Donald Trump is dangerous for our country, you can only imagine what they would have justified themselves having done as leaders in our intelligence community to try to stop somebody like that. But I posit something different. A lot of people say, well, people don't like Trump, so this is what we're against him. What if, and I think there's evidence suggesting this, the real scandal is crimes were committed by some insiders in our intelligence agencies in recent years, not just in 2016, but for many years.
Yeah.
And what if some of those alleged crimes maybe were committed in 2016, and the fear was once Trump was elected, he's going to go after those. Hillary Clinton might not have, a Bush family member might not have if he'd have been elected, but Trump was a wild card, and he had people around him who were going to look into just that, including Lieutenant General Michael Flynn, who worked in the intelligence community and was aware of some of these practices. So what if all of this is in fact sort of a cover to keep them away, to keep the Trump administration away from exposing bigger alleged abuses or crimes on the part of these government insiders?
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail squarely on the head right there. I mean, certainly Robert Mueller has been around in the Department of Justice for many, many years. Everybody knows that he was appointed director of the FBI just 1 week before the attacks of September 11th, and he spent 13 years at the helm of the FBI, not revealing Senator Bob Graham's 28-page Intelligence Committee report, but rather covering up the involvement that report revealed of 3 Saudi diplomats. And of course, we're talking about John Brennan. He's lied to Congress. Why has nobody charged him with 18 U.S.C. 1001?
Well, and James Clapper provided false information to Congress that he said was a mistake. He misunderstood the question. He claimed that we weren't all being spied on or our data being collected, and soon after that, Edward Snowden revealed that was false. Yeah. Brennan falsely told members of the Senate that they were not being spied on in another matter, and he had to apologize for that because that was incorrect. And we have examples of just politicians we know of who were surveilled, quote unquote, incidentally as they talked to foreign officials, and then their matters leaked to the press in the past. Dennis Kucinich is one of them. Just the ones we know of are pretty egregious. Imagine what we don't know that may have happened that we haven't been able to find out about.
I want to continue on this thread you've introduced about how this might possibly be a bigger ploy to cover up bigger crimes and point all this at Donald Trump. There's been so little conversation about the fact that from 1990 to 1993, while William Barr was the Attorney General under George H.W. Bush and then Bill Clinton, Robert Mueller was the Assistant Attorney General. I don't understand how this is not like the biggest conflict of interest ever, and there's been virtually no conversation about it at all.
Well, I too have had the question, conflicts of interest in the legal world, is my understanding, are supposed to be avoided even when there's an appearance, even if it's not real, because there's supposed to be such a careful process. And I think it's difficult to argue that there's not at least the appearance of a conflict of interest with Mueller investigating matters that involve his former colleagues, that could actually come into matters that he supervised when he was head of the FBI. If we're all being pointed in one direction, in part to distract us from these alleged surveillance abuses, some of which allegedly occurred when Mueller was FBI director and certainly happened under his friend Comey, then how is that not at least a perceived conflict? Even if he's a fair guy and can somehow do this and not let that influence, I still think I've asked quite a few legal minds this very question, and they seem to think it's just a no-brainer that that's the appearance of a conflict by definition.
But nothing. And we've got months
No.
of barking and yelling about Jerome Corsi and Roger Stone. I mean, it seems very much to me, Sharyl, that there was a targeted effort to degrade Alex Jones and his media outlet, InfoWars. I'm not making any kind of judgment about them, but, Hillary Clinton mentioned Alex Jones by name in her now famous alt-right speech. She identified him as a member of the alt-right, as a leader of the alt-right. There's all this infighting happening now. Jerome Corsi was a former colleague, of course, of Roger Stone and Alex Jones, and now they're at each other's throats, putting out information. This one lied, that one lied. And it just seems like a horrendous attack on journalism. Even if these guys did speak to WikiLeaks, how is that a crime?
That's the thing I keep asking myself, sort of the even if, when you hear what accusations are, what the big headline story of the day is, and then I find myself saying, even if that's the case, where, political opposition research, I find a very distasteful process. Both sides did it, both sides do it. Where is that a crime? We haven't made that a crime yet. Why would it be a crime, and maybe there's an answer to this, to provide polling information to Russian nationals? Russians could conduct a poll here if they wanted. I don't think there's any law against that, as far as I know. Is that interfering? I mean, we haven't legislated over a lot of these things that people seem to say or imply are criminal acts. We have to decide, are they or aren't they? And I don't think, considering the evidence, that it's far-fetched to theorize that there is actually an operation that's being conducted and been conducted that targets the players, certain players that are perceived as dangerous or harmful, and goes after them one by one on social media, through the use of the government's tools, however it may be. And,
Right.
If you know how the intelligence agencies operate, I know far less than many, but I know enough to know that they do this sort of thing.
Right. Yeah, I mean, you've been a journalist for many years. You won, I believe, the Edward R. Murrow Award. You won a Daytime Emmy Award. You've been involved in some really outstanding investigative journalism. Your problems really began when you started reporting on Fast and Furious, something that Eric Holder was pivotally involved in. We've heard a lot of talk about Eric Holder possibly wanting to run for president in the future. He's a partner at Covington and Burling, the law firm that's representing Michael Flynn. This seems not good for General Flynn. What can you say about any of that?
I don't have any information on that. I always feel like there's a fairly incestuous relationship among lawyers at big firms and lawyers inside D.C. and even famous firms outside of D.C. That's always made me uncomfortable, although I think they argue that there are connections and friendships, or even what their colleagues are doing for representation are carefully monitored and that there's no conflicts. But, I would be a little bit uncomfortable if my lawyer or his partner were intimately involved in a case involving someone that I'm opposing in court.
Yeah. Yeah, and you and I have both had the distinct pleasure of interviewing another D.C. lawyer, Chris Gowan. You did some great reporting on the Imran Awan trial that went on. It's strange to me. There's a lot of evidence that indicates that Imran Awan had hacked Congress. He was barred from access to the congressional network, not by Jason Goodman or Sharyl Attkisson, but by the U.S. Capitol Police. When I presented a witness to the U.S. Capitol Police who herself presented the evidence of a laptop that she alleged had been hacked by Imran Awan, rather than investigating that and doing a forensic analysis of the laptop, they gave it to Chris Gowan's office, the defense attorney for Imran Awan, where Imran was employed answering telephones. Why didn't they kick in Imran Awan's door?
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak too much to that. The things you talked about, you've covered different aspects of that case. My primary questions in that case remain, and we'll point out that he did issue a plea agreement to not to any sort of spying or computer infractions, but to something professor, and
Bank
he
fraud,
avoided
yeah.
jail time, but avoided prison time. My question stemmed from the fact that an inspector general had previously flagged this entire group of IT professionals and made it pretty clear she had documented all kinds of policy violations, if not legal violations, and felt that everyone up there on the Hill, not everybody, but a lot of prominent Democrats and Republicans wanted to tamp it down and cover it up rather than get to the bottom of it. And that it was she's a pretty credible figure, had evidence to her name, had worked very hard on this case. And I think that to me was very compelling. In the end, like I say, the FBI decided not even to prosecute Imran on the charges that were in their indictment. I believe they said he and his wife had provided false information on tax returns. I mean, there's other things they alleged initially, including also not disclosing some of their income and financial arrangements, which is required by law on their congressional disclosure forms. When you look at the discretion sometimes the agencies use in what to prosecute and what not to prosecute, it's often befuddling because they certainly, it seems to me, could have alleged additional it seemed to be very provable allegations that they decided just to let go for whatever reason.
Well, right, for whatever reasons, exactly. I mean, it seems like they're just, driving hard to the hoop to put Paul Manafort and Jerome Corsi and Roger Stone in jail for their lives, but they put together this sweetheart deal for Imran Awan, who we've got multiple witnesses who have accused him of all kinds of things that seem a lot worse than forgetting who you texted or lying about, whatever it is they're alleged to have lied about. So it's also interesting to me how some of these lawyers all seem to have relationships. Chris Gowan has told me that he worked for the Clinton Foundation retrieving Diet Coke for Bill Clinton, and now he's protecting people like Imran Awan. So it's a sad picture, I think, Sharyl, and the fact that, as you brought up, young people in America today, their minds are being so moved and sort of step by step taken away from the constitutional rights that we are all supposed to be, unalienable, that we are all supposed to enjoy, and people want to give up their guns. They want people spying on their cell phones. It seems there's no outrage over 29 armed officers busting into the home of Roger Stone.
I'm with you on that, and I feel like a lot of attention can be pointed to Congress and we in the news media. I mean, we're supposed to be independently watching this stuff. We're not doing a good job at it. Congress, Democrats and Republicans alike, have told me that when they try to watchdog over some of these federal agencies and activities, that their party leaders, you know how the control is these days, won't let them, and they have to stay on narrative with the party leaders or they will be primaried by their own party. They will never get a position on a committee of any import, which means they can't raise money. And there's all kinds of control going on that's keeping even our political leaders from doing the oversight I think that they're entitled to do and responsible for doing in a lot of these instances.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of people, even Trump voters, Trump supporters, who feel that perhaps Donald Trump is acting in a way that indicates that his hands are tied. He's not able to drain the swamp. It's curious to me also that, while this Robert Mueller investigation is supposed to be about Russian collusion, there are people in Donald Trump's cabinet, I'm thinking specifically of Wilbur Ross, who have had business arrangements with companies in Russia, and Robert Mueller has not, surprisingly, questioned Wilbur Ross.
Well, and I go back to the notion that I'm confused about the idea that business arrangements in Russia have become
criminal,
something
right.
that seems to imply something when thousands of Americans have business relations in Russia and with Russia. Yeah. And in fact, I think people don't know this. There are many U.S. citizens acting lawfully as, quote, foreign agents for Russia, Ukraine, China, Iran, you name the country. And whether you think that should be legal or not, they hire these countries hire direct representatives here that don't always disclose their activities in a transparent way to lobby Congress, to contact reporters, to do all kinds of things. And this especially in general, if they register with a database in the Department of Justice that nobody ever sees, makes it legal. So the implication that, wow, you know, this is something that confused me as well. Maybe I don't know as much about this as other people, but Donald Trump was trying to build a hotel in Russia. Wow. I'm thinking, I don't understand the notion that that's a huge controversy.
Right. Well, that's the thing. They just keep bombarding people with, you know, this false information. It's really a programming of people's minds. It's a character within Robert Mueller's investigation. He's the liaison between the special counsel's office and the press. And I'm talking about Peter Carr, famously known as Mr. No Comment. Now, it was very interesting to see that, I guess it was last week, when BuzzFeed came out with this article claiming that Michael Cohen was told to lie and this and that. For the first time, instead of no comment, Peter Carr came out with a very verbose rebuttal, basically refuting the veracity of the BuzzFeed comment. Have you dealt with Peter Carr, Sharyl? Do you know him?
Nope, I don't have any sources there. And I would say one caution, and I agree, he came out and made that robust denial. But I agree with BuzzFeed on one thing. It was fairly non-specific. So I'm not sure, you know, clearly he said the report was inaccurate, but I'm not quite sure what was inaccurate. Was it inaccurate that the special counsel had documents in hand that proved this fact? Or is he saying there was no such fact that's been determined? Like, which piece of it? And again, they were non-committal. So I'm withholding judgment on all of that till we see what they ultimately come up with publicly.
Right.
It's all very strange.
Well, and I would add to what you're saying. I'm trying to find the exact quote from Peter Carr, but it was so lawyered up in the way it was written, it could have basically meant anything. There were so many qualifying statements in it and caveats to what he said. It's like lawyers fighting lawyers, and you are squarely in this position. Eric Holder, Barack Obama, they are lawyers. They understand that if someone like you is accused of something that could result in you losing your career, losing your reputation, even going to jail, you've got to defend that. So whether their accusations are true or accurate or stand up in court doesn't really matter. They're trying to put you through the torturous experience of having to defend yourself, having to pay lawyers. Can you talk, or are you interested at all in talking about the impact this process has had on you?
Well, yeah, I can speak a little to that. I mean, I'm an optimist, so I don't, when faced with adversity, kind of just sit there mired in indecision and despair. I tend to use stuff like that as motivational. I thought this was very interesting. Certainly when forensic evidence started to come in that proved the government nature of the computer intrusions with specificity, it was pretty exciting in a horrifying way to think you have this tangible evidence in your hand of something I never suspected was true until it was brought to me, and then thought there would never be a way we'd have evidence of it. I find it all quite interesting.
Yeah.
The toll it's taken, yes. I mean, you know, you probably feel the same way. I know a lot of people living this way in light of revelations the past couple of years, not knowing whether today I'm being surveilled by the government, but understanding the possibilities from my sources and from the history. You live your life as if you are. So you change the way you live, you change the way you communicate with sources, you change the way you do everything, which feels very Soviet Union-esque, you know, that to have to live that way. And then expense, of course, I have a wonderful, wonderful lawyer that took this original case and isn't requiring me to pay him anything right now. However, there are expenses that are non-discretionary we've had to cover, including the appellate attorney, who, again, is giving us a wonderful, wonderful deal, but it was about $100,000 just for 5 or 6 weeks of his work, and this has been going on for 4 to 5 years.
Wow.
So, you know, ordinary citizens like us, we can't do this stuff. We don't have a chance because the government has unlimited time and money to break you and wear you down and just drag it out till they bleed you dry.
Well, they're using our money, obviously, taxpayer money, to, persecute the citizens. So you're, in fact, paying the government to
Twice.
harass you and sue you. And just for people, again, who maybe aren't directly familiar with the story, the compelling evidence that you're talking about, at least one element of it, is the finding that they actually changed the hard drive in your computer.
Well, let me update that, because according to an exchange they would never have with me, but one of my forensics team and I believe a member of Congress's staffer who looked into this came away believing there was some transcription error, and genuinely believing there was a transcription error of some kind, and that the hard drive, hopefully, maybe, had not been switched out. But the forensics that we have, again, there are 5 or 6 separate exams that revealed different aspects of it. We know the tools they use. We know the times, even though they erased a lot of it leaves a track in of itself. So we know dates and times and methods for some of the intrusions. We know they had keystroke monitoring, that they used Skype to activate secretly to listen in on conversations and exfiltrate files. We know they got into the CBS system, looked at my Fast and Furious photos in my personal computer. I mean, we know a lot on forensics, and we have much later our forensics, as we've continued to do them, as more tools become available. We've identified multiple government IP addresses that could not have been in my computer but for this unlawful or unauthorized intrusion. And that's, according to the forensics team's gold standard forensics right there.
And am I remembering this incorrectly, or were the IP addresses not somehow associated with the post office?
Yes, these are 2 of them that we know of, at least 2, and there may be more, are from a bank, and I may not be describing this technically correctly, so you know more than I do. I keep saying this, but this is my understanding. There are huge banks of unused or undistributed IP addresses, including at the Postal Service. And these are sometimes checked out or used for operations. The FBI works with the post office on things, on enforcement with the postal inspector's office and so on. So today I'm told by an intel source they wouldn't do it that way. They actually use IP addresses that bounce off signals and can make it look like Russia did it.
Right.
But back when this happened to me, they were using allegedly blank IP addresses they never thought anybody would ever trace or find or detect. And we were able to do that by looking at hibernation data that was preserved in the hibernation mode of one of my computers that led us down this path.
And Sharyl, you've just brought me back to another question I wanted to raise. We've spoken about how so many people have been lulled into this complacency of feeling like, well, I'm not doing anything wrong, so we can allow the government to spy on me. I mean, that sort of implies a lot of trust on the part of the citizen who adopts that attitude. You're saying, I trust the government in this sort of parental kind of way. There's another point that Bill Binney has raised in several of my conversations with him is that the introduction of these private contractors into government work over the past 30 years, Bill says, is the single biggest problem that these government agencies face, because private contractors are motivated not by protecting the Constitution, but by continuing their contracts and generating more money for their corporations. So certainly allowing the government to have this ability to intrude into our private lives and all of our electronic communications, it opens the door quite wide for these contractors to abuse that privilege.
And you would be seeming to put yet another layer between the parties that could be the problem or should be held accountable and those who are holding them accountable. In other words, if you're giving data, for example, to a contractor, that's one step removed from the actual agency that Congress can conduct oversight more easily of.
Right.
And I'll be doing a piece that touches on this in the next couple of weeks on Full Measure, my Sunday show, that talks about a secret foreign intelligence surveillance court document that was released that admonishes the FBI and NSA for a lot of things they did, despite the fact, as an aside, that Christopher Wray, current FBI director, James Comey, former FBI director, have all testified there have been no abuses, no surveillance abuses, even though there are so many well-documented abuses, including by this court, this independent court. That's just an aside. But the court found that among the other abuses she alleged or found by an inspector general that she was reiterating was data was provided that should not have been to at least 3 contractors outside our intelligence agencies. So that's a huge violation, she said, and I think it's pretty clear, of what's supposed to happen and how this information is supposed to be protected.
Absolutely. And I think, when we think about our friend Imran Awan and his involvement in, various businesses that were contracting to whoever, it's, we've got these checks and balances, which of course the free press and the activities of journalists like yourself are intended to make sure the government can't do stuff that they're not supposed to do. But by having these contractors, it seems to me that they've created these complicated ways that they can sort of get around some of these laws and some of these checks and balances. Perhaps a contractor is not going to be susceptible to the same type of oversight or limited by the same laws as the FBI, the CIA, or the NSA might.
And make no mistake, they devise these methods, and we're never meant to know.
Right.
Because, for example, in the case of presenting information for a wiretap, if the information, let's say, is not accurate, or maybe they've exaggerated to get a wiretap, which, by Mueller's own admission, occurred shortly before his watch, and were the reasons that new procedures were instituted in around 2002 in the FBI to try to prevent what were documented abuses of facts that the FBI presented to the FISA court. But this had been flagged to me before 2016 by insiders who said that this is a big problem, that false information is intentionally presented to the FISA court, but unlike a criminal court in our regular life, where that information would later be revealed in court and used as evidence, this stuff for a wiretap is never presented in court and used later for evidence. It's just to, let's say, assuming in the case of bad actors, it's just to get dirt on somebody. They're not going to criminally charge those people. They want to spy on them. Right. And so you'll never know what was the basis under which they obtained the wiretap, because you may never know they had a wiretap. And so that lends itself, the secretive process, to these alleged abuses, according to people who've worked in the system.
Right. And we've heard, of course, about parallel construction. Ray McGovern questioned Robert Mueller directly about this. And basically that's, Robert Mueller goes into your email and, he finds the end point and then he makes up a story to get him from A to B. And it's a really dangerous situation that they're developing there. Sharyl, I know you're very busy, but I'd be remiss if I failed to point out that in addition to the reporting that you were doing on Fast and Furious, you also came under heavy fire for the reporting that you did about the incidents in Benghazi, Libya.
Well, there were many things I was reporting on during that time period, and really we don't know exactly what prompted the surveillance that went on over a long period of time, and it may have been several things. In fact, the forensics teams think there were several stages to the surveillance. But yes, I was doing Fast and Furious. I was assigned to cover the Benghazi attack, which the government was very sensitive about the information of the people that were talking to me and insiders in the Obama administration. I was covering some green energy waste stories that they were extremely sensitive and upset about in the Obama administration that I didn't even think were particularly controversial in terms of Obama's reelection. I guess they were sensitive about it, just talked about, hey, everyone likes the idea of green energy, but there were some extremely wasteful and potentially corrupt projects that have been funded with taxpayer money, and I was reporting on those. And then there were corporate stories I was doing on the pharmaceutical industry and vaccine safety. There were so many different things the government, certain government officials were upset about and were lobbying CBS on a near daily basis to try to stop, that who knows, if it's one or all of the above that they were particularly interested in.
And ultimately, it was pressure on CBS and this is how this system works, essentially, right? People who, when Donald Trump says, the media, the fake news media is the enemy of the people, I don't think he's suggesting that you and all of your colleagues at CBS get into some big Council on Foreign Relations meeting and are told what to do and say. But in the case of someone like you, who's really working hard to do actual hard-hitting investigative journalism that's going to reveal government corruption and wrongdoing, there's somebody there in CBS who says, hey, Sharyl, I'm the producer, I'm the editor, I'm the owner of CBS. Stop doing that or you're fired, and they can fire you. And in the case of someone who's not as tenacious as a Sharyl Attkisson, that person would be basically silenced and stopped. We've seen that happen on a much lower level with Laura Loomer getting kicked off of Twitter, but it's happening all over the place.
And I would say it's a little more subtle. You know it's happening, but they never said to me or say to me, quit covering that stuff or you'll be fired. In fact, they didn't want to fire me. They wanted to force me to stay, which was the irony in the end. But what they do is, they start out wanting the stories and assigning me to them, and then the more news I break and the more pushback we get through these organized AstroTurf campaigns, which the smear artists know how to launch on social media, with members of Congress calling your boss, all the things that they do. And then suddenly somebody, and I don't know who, certainly not everybody's of the like mind, but there's someone in a position, sort of gatekeeper, that decides we're not going to put any more of those stories on this broadcast. And they don't say it's because they want to stop them. They just say, I used to hear with Fast and Furious, and I just really found the tip of the iceberg. I published a lot more online than I could ever get on television. But they would say, you've done such a good job covering this story. You really said it all. And this was very early on. So I would hear things like that, like, you've done such a great job. We've just, there's not that much more to say. And I would say, well, there is a lot more to say,
Yeah.
And I have information now that's more interesting than the initial information I reported. They did that with Obamacare. They assigned me to dig into the Obamacare debacle of the launch and so on. And when I finally got some really fascinating sources, and I had broken some big stories, there came a point, White House hired some new spinners that came over and started to spin the media on that topic, and never again did they want any critical pieces looking at Obamacare, only positive pieces after that. So,
Wow.
Again, they don't say this is why we're doing it. They just say, that's a good story, maybe tomorrow. That's a good story. No time today, but we'll look at it next week. Things like that.
Right. And of course, ultimately, you chose to leave CBS and you started your own program, Full Measure. What is the best way for people to watch that, Sharyl? I've got fullmeasure.news up on the screen right now.
Yeah, go to our website under About. It'll have a list of our stations and times, but you can watch online anytime. Mm-hmm. And we do that good old-fashioned, while everybody's on narrative, whatever channel you're watching, even if Fox is more conservative and MSNBC is more liberal, but they're probably talking about the same 3 or 4 stories. We're largely off that narrative because we're not taking the talking points and putting those pundits on. We're digging for our own stories and looking for stories that the powers don't want people to report. Those are the ones that draw me.
Right.
So you'll see good old-fashioned neutral reporting or underreported angles or interesting stuff on our Sunday program, which we feed to 43 million households every Sunday that you won't see on other places.
And it looks like your team has grown substantially since the last time we spoke.
Yes, it's a small team, don't get me wrong, but Dave Sinclair, who runs the show, has been more than generous and exceeded their promises and the resources we would give. And I have a former producer friend of mine from CNN. We recently hired a former producer friend of mine that was at ABC, and before that at CBS with me. We have an Al Jazeera and BBC former producer. People want to do this kind of reporting. We get calls every week from people who want to do independent, good old-fashioned watchdog accountability reporting freely, and they're just not being allowed to do it at their traditional outlets.
Right, and I may be misquoting this, but there's somebody who said that journalism is about asking people questions that they don't want to answer, and everything else is just PR.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I think there's a huge service we can do in the difficult stories that often garner this organized criticism and counterattacks from the smear industry. But so far, this company, it's been 3.5 years I've been working Measure, and we've gotten a great deal of support no matter what path we follow from our bosses.
Right, and that smear industry is super active. I know you're busy and you've got to go pretty soon, but just one last thing I wanted to ask you. I've recently started a show with James and Joanne Moriarty called Unseen Libya. The Moriartys are a married couple from Texas who were conducting business in Libya from about 2007 to 2011. And General Michael Flynn has said they've provided the best human intelligence that anyone has ever gotten on Libya. I don't know if you've had a chance to communicate with the Moriartys or if you'd be interested in doing that, but they've got some incredible information about what actually happened there. And they also have been suppressed since I've started working with them. The attacks against me have grown. It's an amazing thing to see.
Well, I would be interested in hearing more about it, and I would say my general rule of thumb based on experience is when those big targeted attacks come after you and they're listening to you and I right now, as you know, we have people assigned to us from Media Matters and other propaganda groups that comb through every syllable we utter looking for something to controversialize.
Yep.
You know you're hovering over the target when you get that organized spate of attacks from the usual suspects, maybe Salon and the typical, there's a handful of maybe 10 blogs and astroturfers, and they all come out with the same narrative at the same time, the same attacks, the social media. That usually means you're hitting on something.
Yeah, and the thing that I find almost, the most incredible aspect of it is they are very adept at customizing the attack. Like, in other words, Salon is not coming after me because that would raise my profile, but they need to use Salon to go after you. I have got low-level losers coming after me, and they hide most of what they're doing by masquerading as, immature antics, and really most thinking people would say, oh, Jason, ignore these guys, they're just idiots. But they are insidious in their process and determined in what they're doing. I'm convinced that mere idiots would go away after a couple of days or weeks.
Right.
I've got the same people after me coming up on 2 years now.
Well, and also there's roundabout ways they attack you, and I learned some of this from the smear operators I interviewed for my book. Mm-hmm. But let's say they want to come after me for my factual reporting on the alleged links between vaccines and autism as exposed by a pro-vaccine government expert scientist who says the government covered it up. Well, that's very damaging, but they know if they come after me on that, which they do that too, but that's so transparent who that is. So all of a sudden you start to see things that maybe I'm a white supremacist or something completely a non sequitur because it's a way to undermine and controversialize in a way that doesn't immediately make clear or expose, who's behind it unless you're thinking about it.
Right.
And it gets other people whipped up, on social media. It's another way they can get real people kind of interested and involved in the smearing that they're trying to do.
Right, and certainly for the people who haven't heard of you, if the first thing they hear is, oh, Sharyl Attkisson, she's an anti-vaxxer, they're going to form a certain opinion of you. And I've also noticed this is something that they really work hard to do. When we're talking about vaccine safety, I think any sensible thinking person recognizes the value in vaccinating a population against dangerous and deadly diseases. I know you have children of your own. Why does that preclude a conversation about what the ingredients of these vaccines are? We want vaccines, but we also want to make sure that they're safe for children, that they're tested as rigorously, if not more rigorously, than other pharmaceuticals. The questions that come to my mind is, why did the 1984 Vaccine Injury Act recategorize vaccines as biological rather than pharmaceutical? And there's a lot of questions there that even if you ask the question, you're branded as anti-vax. If you ask, hey, is carbon dioxide really dangerous to the environment, or is it maybe sulfur monoxide or other pollutants? Why is there this war against carbon dioxide? You're branded as a climate denier, and you're not even given a platform to speak. They want to make these into discussions and shut down anyone who doesn't agree with them.
Well, that's the tell, and I went down this rabbit hole when assigned for CBS to look into vaccines and the troops, vaccine injuries. And when it's presented, as it often is, by the astroturfers, that they'll say, you're killing babies because you're questioning vaccine safety, and diseases are going to come back, instead of saying, which every reasonable scientist would say, we can keep vaccines and actually make the program more robust and safest for the most people by continuing to look at the safest ways to do this. Like, it's not this either or, you vaccinate everybody with everything without regard to safety, or everybody's going to die of diseases, but that's often sort of the AstroTurf argument.
Yeah, it's really important what you're doing, Sharyl, and I want to thank you for joining me again. I really appreciate your time. The program, of course, is Full Measure, and people can watch that online by going to fullmeasure.news, and you're going to get the schedule on there by going to About. You can also purchase Sharyl's fantastic book, The Smear. I'm going to recommend that people get it from Barnes & Noble. Of course, you can purchase it from a CIA-controlled retailer if you'd like to go to Amazon.com. It's a great book that people should read, and Sharyl is doing just an amazing level of trying to keep real journalism alive, asking people the questions that they don't want to answer. Sharyl, thank you so much, and best of luck. I'd love to hear from you in the future when there's some more developments in your case.
Thanks a lot, Jason. Appreciate it.
Have a great day. Thanks for watching, everybody.